1979. On a Caribbean island known as Matul, a woman is attacked in her home by a grotesque maggot-covered undead creature desperately trying to break in. As the woman tries to barricade herself inside, its monstrous, rotting arm punches its way through the door, grabs her head, and slowly but surely drags it towards a large, sharp splinter of wood, which very slowly punctures its way into her eyeball and sinks inside her brain. After the success of both John Carpenter's Halloween and George Romero's Dawn of the Dead in 1978, it was clear that audiences were yearning for increasingly schlocky, visceral thrills, and studios began to take note. But one particularly grotesque zombie movie, marketed as a sequel to Dawn of the Dead, made by Italian director Lucio Fulci, took the level of schlock and gore to a whole new level. It both disgusted and thrilled audiences around the world. It got itself banned in the UK and became one of the most infamous video nasties of all time. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of the zombie movie, as we discuss Lucio Fulci's macabre masterpiece, Zombie Flesh Eaters. Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across several weeks. We are currently in the middle of exploring the evolution of the zombie movie, and this is part 7, in which, as the intro suggested, we will be looking at the classic, infamous, controversial zombie movie from 1979, Lucio Fulci's Zombie Flesh Eaters. Very, very exciting. We will be talking about this movie in spoilerific detail, although to be honest, it's a movie that is so thin on plot, I feel like we can't really spoil anything about it. But, you know, I would say if you haven't seen this movie, please go away and watch it. It's just so much fun. So lots of stuff to discuss this week. We've got so much to cover, so let's get straight into it. Joining me to discuss all things Zombie Flesh Eaters, video nasties, and Lucio Fulci, I've got a brand new guest for you. Someone I've been wanting to get on the podcast for a very long time. He is a film critic, he's a journalist, he's an author, he's a writer, he's a lecturer, he's an academic. He's currently in the middle of writing a book about Stephen King's It, and he has a particular taste for the nastier, more extreme end of horror cinema, so a great person to have this week. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the podcast Charlie Oughton. Hello, Charlie.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. Such a pleasure to have you on at last. So, first of all, Charlie, just for people who don't know about you, tell me a bit about yourself, sort of who you are and what you do.
I, my dear, am a general reprobate. I get
Official
around.
title, yeah.
Oh, yes, very much so.
Yes.
Basic gist is I'm a lecturer in film, media and culture at 3 different universities.
Lovely.
I'm a journalist. I've written for everyone from Sci-Fi Now through to Rue Morgue, through to way back in the day, places like The Dark Side. Amazing. I also do bits for various DVD labels, including a recent release of Firestarter. I've done bits on Sky News. But the big thing at the moment is I am just, thank God, finishing a book on Stephen King's It.
That's amazing. So tell us about that. You've really kind of picked the perfect time, it feels like, to write this book as well. I mean, is that partly because of the way it was being resurrected, the new film and everything, or was that all coincidence for you?
Kind of coincidence. It's one of these things, I read it way back in the day when I was 14.
Yes.
And I kept on kind of fiddling around with the draft over the years.
Yes.
And then eventually they, the whole thing about they were going to get the remake done, and it kept on falling apart. And then eventually the film actually was happening. I thought, if I don't get this done now, I'm never going to. And it all kind of slotted into place since then. And the thing that's kind of happened with it is the story of the book is it's looking at how the adaptations have changed over the years. Everything from right back in the day, the miniseries, We Love You, Tim Curry.
I loved that miniseries.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Right through to the audio tapes, both one by Stephen Webber.
Yes.
Which is amazing, and my God, it goes far in that. I mean, the things he screams, you don't listen to that with your mother, kids. You really don't. Right through to the other audio, and through to obviously the main film that's just come out, and also fan narratives as well. And the whole idea of this book is that realistically, yes, it's hardcore academic theory, but it's done so that anybody with a brain can read it, because quite frankly, academia doesn't belong in the ivory tower, because guess what, kids? Everybody has a brain.
Exactly right. Oh, I couldn't agree more. And that's something that I believe with this podcast as well. I think anyone can talk about films, anyone can appreciate films, anyone can analyse films as best they want, you know. I'm a huge fan of the miniseries. What do you think? Just to ask you, I don't want to go down an wormhole with you, because that's not what we're here to talk about. But what are your thoughts on the film, the Bill Skarsgård, you know, the recent film in comparison to the series?
Having had time to think about it,
Yeah.
I really loved what they did with the kids.
Yes.
I mean, the original kids were cast very much to their personalities, very, very much so. With film kids, it's not the case. I mean, for example, a little bit of trivia here, a lot of Richie's quips were actually written by the kid who plays Eddie.
Ah, interesting.
Very much so. And they have very, very different personalities.
Yes.
In terms of the clown himself, they make him a lot more otherworldly. I mean, the thing about the Tim Curry version, of course, was that he's very, very human, and he's basically like the world's worst bully, whereas the Skarsgård version is far more about, let's just see how crazy and off the wall he can be.
It's a proper monster, right, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And actually, as far as I remember, I haven't read the book since I was a teenager, but the clown isn't as kind of prominent as the films and series make him out to be. That's right, isn't it? It's kind of about a bit more than that, it feels like, the book.
Realistically, there's so much of the book, and a lot of what my book is about, is the clown actually has a very small part indeed.
Yes.
The thing about these kids is the book is about how, at first, I mean, when I reread it, I was genuinely stunned, because I've read it a lot over the years, and I mean, I remembered so much of the actual precise wording from right back when I first read it when I was 14, which is long ago.
Amazing.
But then again, the thing about the kids is they're traumatized. They are so traumatized.
That's right.
And it's far more about, for the first few chapters, you've got so much of their absolute utter self-loathing. They hate their lives.
They do.
And it comes about the fact that, yes, it appears as the various different things that they're afraid of, but it's not even really that. It's kind of partly what they wish they could be. And it's almost kind of like a morality tale in that. And the thing is, they eventually get together, and they really do realise that they make each other complete.
Yes.
And so much of the thing about the adaptations is what kind of bits are knocked off the kids, what kind of angles of the personalities are changed. I mean, for example, notice that in the recent film, nothing is mentioned at all about Bill being a writer.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And also, maybe it's as an adult, you know, when I watched it as a child, I was terrified by the clown and I wanted to see the clown, and Tim Curry was brilliant. As an adult, the things that were freaking me out more than the clown when watching the new film was the parents, the behaviour of the people in the town, you know, Derry in general being this kind of monster. And that's what I'm hoping they're going to continue a bit more with the second film this year. I'm hoping to see more of that.
Yeah, I mean, one very brief thing that I am really, really hoping for is there has been shots released of James McAvoy, who plays Bill, the older Bill, on his bike Silver in front of a shop front with the name Secondhand Rose on it, and that refers to a tiny, tiny little kind of, I think, 20-page bit of the book, whereby they come back as adults and they go on walking tours, and they're trying to remember about the childhoods. And this comes from a whole different kind of theory set, but he basically kind of is walking along, he comes across a secondhand shop, and he finds a bike in there, and he goes in, and out of nowhere his stutter comes back. There is no Pennywise in there. There is no Beastie.
Yes.
He scares the living daylights out of himself, because he suddenly realises that it takes one trigger and he's right back down that wormhole, and he's got no control. And the guy in the shop starts kind of reaching for his gun, saying, you all right? You're going to have a fit? Don't you have a fit on me? Stop it. And he's literally... You know, you have a section of text that's in big, bold writing, and he says, I don't effing stutter. And he's gone. He's just in bits. And that's the scary thing, because it's about that anxiety.
Yes, that kind of trauma as well. It's interesting. I'm really looking forward to the second film, because I think that, that is the weakness of the miniseries, is the second half, right? And I think, surely that they can improve on that, hopefully, with this next film. So very exciting. I'm reading at the moment, actually, Pet Sematary again, because obviously we've got the new film coming up and we're going to be covering it on the Zombie series of this podcast. Are you a fan of Pet Sematary?
Loved it.
Oh, man, it's so good, right?
The thing about Stephen King is that people think of him as, the old thing he used to say about he was this mac and cheese horror writer. He is lying. He is the skeeziest, most, particularly that period of his life where he was up to his eyeballs on coke and God knows what else. He goes dark. The thing I love about all this stuff is he has no filter. Yes. And everything's like a really whacked out coke dream. And the thing is, it's particularly important now because we like to believe that because you have things like YouTubers who do crazy stunts and stuff, we believe we're uncovered. We are not. And so when you actually genuinely read back over things like the idea of would you bring your child back regardless, most parents think, not being funny, but how different is that to a teething toddler, stabby toddler, who matters? You would, because we have to have things to hold on to, and he acknowledges that in a way that we daren't now, and that's the beautiful thing.
It's fascinating. Well, I don't want to keep you talking about Stephen King for the whole time, but I would love to. So we are here to talk about zombie movies first and foremost. Charlie, what's your opinion on the zombie movie as a subgenre, would you say?
This is one of the things that people have kind of been surprised about. People assume I'm going to be really into vampires. I find them a bit toothless. But
God.
I like my zombies because I find them, this is going to sound so pervy, I'm sorry. I think they can be oddly kind of sexy.
Interesting. Okay. Not vampires, but zombies you find sexy.
Vampires are too clean. They're too polished. Yeah. And they're too... It's almost like, you've got the costume on, but I'm not being funny, but, we all know the kind of basic idea of the vampire myth. You've got no lead in your pencil, fella, sorry. Whereas with zombies, so much of it is... It's the way that they can be changed. It's the way you can either have the slow and shuffly. Yeah. It's the way that you can have, the fast ones. But I think, my introduction really was via Fulci.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. And I was going to say, if you're talking sexy zombies, are there any sexier than the maggot zombies in Fulci?
I agree. When Mr. Maggots, as I have always very fondly thought of him, when in Zombie Flesh Eaters, Zombie 2, he literally comes up, he's got this smile on his face. It's like, hey, baby, I'm coming to get you. There's maggots all over him. It's like, it's funny because when I was a kid, I used to be I was not good with death. I was not good with dead bodies. It used to give me nightmares to the extent that my friends used to take the mickey out of me.
Right.
And they really freaked me out. But with him, it was something along the lines of there was a charisma behind it.
Yes.
And that's what kind of got me around it. Because back in the day, my kind of introduction to all this was my parents ran a video, not distribution, a rental agency.
Great, amazing.
Right back in the day, it's funny. People assume that the video nasties and everything was just a London-based phenomenon. It really wasn't.
No.
They ran a thing called a company called Direct Video out of Boston and Lincolnshire.
Yeah.
And some of my earliest memories are of sitting in the living room on the living room floor, reboxing all of these videos, things like one of the Child's Play films.
Yeah.
Because otherwise people nick the covers. So I grew used to having this imagery around. My mum was a massive Hammer fan.
Oh, great.
And
so you kind of grew up in a horror environment then all your life?
Oh, very much so, very much so. I used to hear lots of stories because back in the day, my dad, before he, well, it's a weird story, before he met my mum and became a pornographer.
Amazing.
He'd been a priest.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he'd kind of bounced from such radically different worlds. So I grew up hearing stories about, hauntings, and when you become a priest, you learn the rites of exorcism.
Yes.
And I grew up learning about all kinds of, family history of that kind of thing through to, he was talking to people like Richard Desmond down here about, video nasties and about girly mags and stuff that he was doing. And so all this imagery kind of essentially seeped in. But it's funny because I always loved Chucky, but the zombies and the dead stuff used to scare me, particularly if it was gushy.
Interesting. And, I think Fulci zombies, this feels like this was the moment when zombies did start getting really gross and gruey and squelchy and nasty, right?
Absolutely. And it's It's a weird old film because at first it starts out, it's got that beautiful, delicious sleaziness I love with things like New York Ripper, for example, later on. But it's the unapologetic way that they are, it's against this realistic backing. And you've got that beautiful bit of New York skyline.
Yes.
And particularly when, you know, it comes out and you get all the kind of synthy effects. Wow, 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 wow,
Yeah,
wow. And
love that music, by the way.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It works so well because all of a sudden it corrupts. If you've ever been really, truly terrified, your heartbeat, so you get this odd thing in your ears.
Boom. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It kind of, you get that kind of odd. It's a toss up between that odd kind of drumming sound and literally the whoosh as your adrenaline's going up and down.
Yes.
And it's always reminded me of that. And it's the fact that he has this thing of, at one time you'll get kind of the further away shots whereby they look oddly realistic and scarily realistic, and then he will just have these really silly close-ups, extreme close-ups, where you just see, I mean, you know, towards the end, one of the zombies you see, it's actually, if you look at it closely, the zombie's got a cataract, but it looks like it's just bog-eyed.
yes.
It gets so stupid.
Yes, it does. And it balances kind of campy stupidness and real nastiness in this movie so well, I think, doesn't it? Beautifully. You know, you kind of gasping 1 minute, laughing the next. That's what I love about it.
Is there something big? That's just what we'd like to know.
One more step and I'm gonna blast you. Now freeze where you are!
Yes, it's my father's boat.
And how long since you last spoke to him?
Well, we have to go to Matul. We're trying to locate Anne's father. She hasn't heard from him for some time.
That's not a cool place to hit. Natives claim it's cursed. They avoid it like the plague.
After a brief image of a shooting, we have a boat that is sailing through the harbour, very slow, very picturesque. And it turns out that there is a zombie on it. And it turns out that this boat belonged to the father of this particular girl. And he's gone missing and they're not quite sure what's going on. And they've eventually found out that he's gone over to this other island somewhere. And there's something very strange going on medically there. And we eventually go over there, and it turns out there is indeed a series of scientific experiments going on to find out exactly what is causing the dead to rise. And it becomes this delightful dialogue between the scientists saying, you know, what is causing this? Is it some form of epilepsy? Is it some form of neurological disorder? Versus, is it the witch doctor?
Yes, exactly. Tell me then, so this is the movie that did this terrify you when you first watched it then?
It absolutely did, partly because of the gross zombies, because I really was not good at dealing with squelch.
Yeah.
But it was also partly, it was the idea of them, I think, strange enough, it was actually Mr. Maggots. At first, it was something about the empowerment of that image. It was just the absolute delighting in it.
Yeah. By Mr. Maggots, you mean you're talking about the conquistador zombie that comes out from the ground, who we see on the posters and the front covers and everything. Yes.
Yes, he is my Mr. Maggots.
I love it. From this point onwards, we should call him Mr. Maggots. I like that. That's good. Mr. Maggots freaked you out.
He at first, it absolutely terrified me because I couldn't get around the squelch factor, and it's one that because I teach film studies, I often show this bit to my students.
Yeah.
Sometimes without trigger warning because I'm evil. And it gets them as well because it's, you know, when we think of the idea of maggots and squirmy things, there's this automatic signifier of literally having no further bodily control.
Yes.
Regardless of the fact he's actually otherwise pretty together. But it's this idea of gross out for the sake of it that instantly twigs something in our brains. And for me, it was that enjoyment of the loss of control and the fact that they were kind of falling off him. I vaguely remember I was eating macaroni at the time, which didn't help.
No, that's not good. That's not what you want.
And it just it terrified me because it was the blatancy of it.
Yes.
Whereas, say later on, it was part of that very come here baby thing that he's got going on that eventually I just thought, you can't not. It's something about there is this enjoyment. This is a reanimated corpse essentially, and yet it's enjoying life. And that to me, it was almost like almost like a Beetlejuicy type thing going on.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's it. And also, you're reminded so much that these are reanimated corpses. I think more than, so far we've talked about the Romero movies. Last week we talked about Dawn of the Dead. And even though Dawn of the Dead did massively kind of up the gore, it kind of felt almost like sort of video gamey gore in a way, the kind of shootings in the head and stuff. There's something about what Fulci brings to these movies. Like you say, it's the maggots, it's the rotting looking flesh. It's so much more just grotesque. And you're right, he seems to take so much enjoyment in it. There's that Italian filmmaker thing of just kind of bathing in this macabre gore, I suppose, isn't it?
It is. The thing that makes it so powerful to me particularly is that, as you were saying, it switches between this very extraordinarily, reasonably realistic gore, especially things like the head wounds.
Oh, yeah.
And just utter stupidity, just real craziness. And the thing is about that, when we think about dreams and about nightmares, they're not logical.
No.
They switch between, very realistic imagery, and then all of a sudden you'll be having sex with your cat or something.
Yes,
peculiar.
Exactly. Yeah, the usual.
I said that out loud.
Yeah,
Never mind.
we've all been there.
something like that, and because of that, it makes it feel so much more authentic, because you genuinely feel as though you're looking in somebody's weird part of their brain. And of course, the thing is with that as well, it becomes very disarming, because particularly when you have shots that are actually very, very beautiful, particularly some of the backlit shots, you can't help but appreciate how much it brings out the hue of the world. And the thing is about these things, it makes you see different parts of nature.
Yes.
And so much of, if you look at things like old memento mori photographs, the human body decaying is very, very interesting. It's very textured.
Yes.
It's something that people like Patricia McCormack talks about in terms of her Sydney sexuality stuff. It's saying, if you're going to watch this film, you have to partake. You have to let it reach out to you, because otherwise you ain't going to understand it.
Yes.
Particularly if you've, like we have in this film, where you have, if you have a couple and one of the loved ones gets killed, you don't automatically start thinking, oh my God, it's disgusting. Instead, it's like, I don't care what's gone wrong with your body, because bodies change over time anyway. For goodness sake, we're in an age now where people think that if you're 40, you're somehow, just about to pop your rocker off.
Yes.
And it helps us to appreciate those textures.
But I think that's also what scares us, right, about zombies. And, a couple of weeks ago, me and Rosie talked about Cronenberg and Shivers and Rabid, and this idea of our body betraying us, I suppose. And it's this reminder of, we are all slowly decaying. We are all slowly heading towards this point. We're all slowly becoming Mr. Maggots, essentially. We are one day going to look like him, and I think that is we are literally sort of faced with death in zombie movies, aren't we? Around sort of every corner. That's probably something that we have to sort of face up to, I guess. And that's partly what terrified you as a child, I imagine, and what terrifies people about this movie.
Yes. Oh, very much so. I mean, as I say, going back to when I used to watch films with my mum, I can remember particularly watching Countess Bathory with my mum years ago. I think Countess Bathory is the right thing. I can't bloody remember, but it was literally the bit where she's looking in the mirror and just literally mourning her looks, and my mum at the time must have been about 36, and yet she was we moved to the middle of nowhere, right, but she'd been very much a London girl.
Yes.
And she was very she absolutely scandalised the neighbourhood, because she still dressed very, very young, and she could get away with it. She really had the body for it. And I just remember looking up and just seeing this absolute horror on her face as she was talking about this idea of gradually being decrepit. It was something that happened to other people. It was a fate worse than death. Yeah. One of the things that I find quite interesting, putting kind of film studies lecturer hat on, is that when you look back over Zombie 2, you're kind of thinking, well, okay, is this a kind of weird colonialisation narrative? Is it a case that it's kind of being rude about their culture? Because, okay, so we don't believe in witch doctors and zombies, but is it essentially making fun of them? And I think, because there's this whole thing of, well, actually, no, it isn't science. It really is bad people reanimating the dead. And it's like, well, actually, it's just that cultural perspective, and in fact having reverence for the dead and even considering them part of the community in some senses is something I think we could actually learn from, even though it's obviously put in such a horrific angle there. It's and obviously those zombies are marauding and evil and horrible, but there is that that sense of them still being part of the community that I think in that culture that we don't have, that we could do with. I think I find that quite comforting, actually.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, because I think you're right, and I think it's called Zombie 2 because it was originally marketed as this is a follow-up to Dawn of the Dead, because Dawn of the Dead was actually, I think Fulci and this film was being made even before Dawn of the Dead was released, but because then Dawn of the Dead became such a success, they've just sort of slapped a number 2 on it, and Italians has called it Zombie 2. But actually, I was reading that it was more inspired by the old voodoo zombie tradition of I walked with a zombie and white zombie and movies like that. And so it's a really interesting kind of balance of those two things, of the two cultures. Like you say, it's definitely got that kind of Haitian folklore side to it as well, doesn't it? But it's also got a lot of Romero nastiness too, which is what's great. Yeah.
It's weird because thinking back to things like White Zombie and I Walk with a Zombie and stuff like that, I always find those films terribly sad. In the sense,
yeah.
And it's more of a case of that there's so much more attention paid to it actually being far more of an authentic representation. And I just felt so sorry for those people. Obviously the political narrative is there, but I just felt it was done without the fun. Whereas I think the thing that I love about the Fulci version is that he's partly saying to me that the thing about these films is that it's partly saying life is really, really hard, kids. The universe can be really, really difficult. You've got to swing your pants or you'll go mad.
You've got to swing your pants or you'll go mad. I love it. I agreed. Fulci in general, we've touched upon this already. What are your thoughts on Lucio Fulci as a director? How would you describe a typical Fulci movie, do you think?
People talk about him being this old hack and so forth, but and yes, of course, he had that background, and yes, of course, he things like the House of Clocks, old TV thing he did. Yes, it's bloody ridiculous, but at the same time, there's this beauty in what he does. Sweet House of Horrors as well, but House of Clocks, I think particularly, there's sequences where you see an elderly couple going and taking care of the bodies of a younger couple, and at first, the old woman kind of bends down and very, very gently just places a kiss on this girl's face. Comes up and she's got a load of mould on her mouth. She just wipes it off, and it is that kind of sublime to ridiculous thing. And I think the thing is the nastiness of what he talks about as well. There is no political correctness in his work, and I actually really love that because it expands the idea of the human mind. I don't like this idea that you can't show to be, because I'm sorry guys, it's the real world is not like that. We have an amygdala. We have a thing in our brain that says, can I eat it? Can I kill it? Or do I sleep with it?
Yes, yeah.
And because of that, I think he's a very honest director. The whole thing about the beyond, coming back to the beginning of that, it's so gratuitous, but that is what people are like.
Yeah, no, totally. There is something very, almost kind of satisfying about his movies in a way, in that you just kind of let them wash over you. They are, like you said, there's kind of dreamlike aspects to them almost, and they just get you on a kind of completely visceral level more than anything else. And I enjoy them more actually than even filmmakers like Argento in a way. I don't know what it is that he kind of, I'm just able to just bathe in them in this weird way. We're going to talk about the Gates of Hell trilogy next week, and I think that's where he takes that one step further almost, doesn't he? This idea of I don't know, just kind of abandoning logic or anything.
I agree. It's funny. People like Argento, this is going to get me shot. I don't really care. It's like going into a gallery and thinking, oh, this is a terribly pretty painting. Oh, yes, what do you think about it, Martha?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how I feel about it too. I'm a little bit alienated by it. It's the way I feel about Wes Anderson. I almost find they're almost too pretty, too immaculate, too much like you've got to look at them with an objective eye, which pulls me out of them a little bit, whereas there's something about Fulci I don't have that with his.
There is that emotional intensity that,
yes,
particularly today, is not politically correct, but it's so true. And the thing about those films is that partly because they're done in this kind of dreamlike way, it makes it oddly okay. It makes it so that you're not doing this. And I'm very much a believer in a Stephen King school of thought, rather, that it becomes a safety valve. For me, to be honest with you, part of the reason why I got back into horror as an adult was I was going through a very, very hard time mental health-wise. I had very, very bad depression. And I found that Fulci particularly, and, The Beyond, because I think that was I think it was the first one of his I really properly watched.
Yeah.
If you are seesawing between that utter, oh my God, this is so stupid, oh my God, that's beautiful, and oh my God,
Yes.
what the hell, you can't think of anything else that blows the world away.
Yes. So true. It's all encompassing and immersing, right? It is. Yeah.
Yes.
So zombie flesh eaters. Let's continue with zombie flesh eaters. I mean, first of all, I should ask you, so you said it scared you as a child. What do you think of it now as an adult? Are you a fan of this movie? Do you like it? Would you recommend it?
I am. I like it because of the fact it seesaws so badly.
Yes.
It's so silly. And also the performances are actually pretty good. I mean, a couple of the cast Shakespearean actors and so forth.
Right, I was like proper thesps in this. It's a very weird mix, isn't it? It's very odd. So you've got Ian McCulloch and Richard Johnson. I mean, these were people from the RSC and stuff. Popping up in Zombie Flesh Eaters. It is bizarre, right? Weird cast.
It's beautiful. It's funny because some of the actual kind of low-key acting is just, it's a bit ropey, but I think the Shakespeare comes across. One point there's a line, he literally says this line. I actually wrote this down because I loved it so much. Transforming into a wasteland of terror. And he really says it like that. It's like, you darling ham.
I love it. I love the hamminess of it. It's brilliant. And, like you said, there's this real mix because some of the actors aren't even actors. There's the police that we see at the beginning who are just genuine, just police that they got, to come and film a scene, brought their own uniform and everything. So there's a lot of that kind of classic kind of making a movie on a budget type feel to this as well, isn't there? But then, you've got these like British thesps. It's very odd. And I don't think these guys even saw the film for years and years. I think Ian McCulloch, because he introduced it on my Arrow Blu-ray, and he was like, well, I saw this film for the first time a few years back and it's astounding, and I just thought that was really funny. He clearly at the time couldn't give a shit, I think, probably thought he'll collect the paycheck and never see or hear from this film again. But yeah, just I love that. What a weird, odd mix of people involved in this film.
It is, and yet the thing I love about it as well, some of the performances, sure, some of it is really silly, like, just like Cataract Zombie Lady, it's like, she's just standing there going, oh, I'm goodness, I'm a zombie. Yeah. But at the same time, in the infamous section whereby, a lady's eye is put out.
Yes.
I mean, the build up to that, you just think, you poor woman.
Right, so that's a funny thing as well, how long... Fulci, everything seems to happen in slow motion, right? Everything takes forever, and the way he just kind of celebrates and basks in these moments. That eye scene, again, what is Fulci's obsession with eyes? But eyes and maggots, it feels like. But the eye scene, it takes forever, right, to get there. You see this head slowly being pushed, slowly and slowly and slowly, and the camera kind of flicks back and forth, and you think, how far are they going to go with this? Are they going to show me? Are they going to cut away? And it just keeps going. It's just astounding, isn't it?
I still find it hard to watch. I mean, I was watching it again recently for this, and I must admit, I'm a lot better at that stuff than I used to be, but I still kind of, I've got one eye closed. Do I need to hand over the other eye? How long ago did I have my dinner? And I was literally thinking, I was trying to calculate my ratio of, am I going to puke on my laptop? Oh my God.
To avoid fainting, keep repeating to yourself, it's only a movie. Only a movie. Only a movie. Only a movie.
Hello everybody. Now what you heard just then was a clip from not Zombie Flesh Eaters, but of course from the infamous, notorious banned Video Nasty, the original movie by Wes Craven, Last House on the Left. This is going to be one of several movies that we're going to be covering in the next Patreon episode. So to run alongside this Zombie Flesh Eaters chat, I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to cover the Video Nasties from the early 80s. I'm joined by Brad Hanson and we talk all things Video Nasties. In usual Brad Hanson form, we do a kind of also rans episode and he brings you a list of 10 of the most notable movies worth talking about. So be warned, there's some seriously extreme content that we go into in depth in this episode. That will be available for all patrons this weekend, and here's a little snippet of what you can expect.
There's various beheadings and just some of the nastiest shit, and I got sent a copy when I bought something else.
Wow.
And out of curiosity I thought, I'm gonna watch it. This is when I was in my my extreme days. I would say that I was a sad, depressed young man, but at the time I had a cat, had a house, and had a long-term girlfriend. So
you've never been happier.
Honestly, it was all downhill from there. 25 was my peak, and since then it's all gone to shit.
This is what nasty videos do to your life.
What happened. She left me.
Mary Whitehouse. She was right.
She was right. The girlfriend actually was like, "I don't want this film in the house."
Yeah,
rightly so.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd watch it. Postman turns up. I open the door. He looks at the television screen and he sees this fucking. And I was like, I've got to get rid of it.
Yeah.
So I sold it on eBay.
Oh God!
For a lot of money.
Oh my God!
Like an obscene amount of money for what is a weird Japanese
snuff film. So if you want to hear more, simply sign up to the Patreon, donate $5 to help support the podcast and defray the costs of what we do by going to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. And on that note, I want to say a big thank you to everybody who has signed up to the Patreon and donated $5 in the last couple of weeks, including Mimi Jones, Joseph Norris, Elizabeth Brozek, Michelle Peoples, Phil Thistleton, Logan J. Nicholson, James Rodriguez, Joel Hall, Adam Kimio, Harry Constable, Dave Darmody, Adam Locks, Nigel Fuller, Tal Mertenbaum, Ross Stewart, James Page, TRS, Alice Sidgwick, Lauren Holloway, Chris Salter, Sam Rogers, and Kieran Bambrick. Thank you so much to all of those people, and apologies if I massacred any names there. I really appreciate all of those people donating to the podcast and helping to defray the costs of what we do here. So, as I mentioned, you will have access to the upcoming episode on Video Nasties. You will also be able to hear 5 mini episodes that we recorded whilst at Glasgow Fright Fest last week. One movie in particular which my co-host Louise Blaine said was better than a recent Best Picture winner, and another movie which I said was not just the worst movie of the festival but one of the worst movies I have ever seen. So there are some really interesting and fun discussions to check out on those mini episodes. They are all still available, as well as a whole multitude of other bonus episodes. If you want to sign up and you want to listen to some of this content, simply go to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. Now, let's return to our discussion of zombie flesh eaters. Can we please talk about what I think is possibly the best scene in any zombie movie, if not any horror movie I've ever seen, which is Zombie versus Shark, okay? Oh my God. I really genuinely think this scene astounds me for so many reasons. It's like preposterous, but it's also beautiful, and it's also terrifying, and it's also shocking, and you're like, how did he make this? How did this happen? This seems to go with nothing else in the film. It is just wonderful, isn't it? I mean, what do you make of that scene?
I think it's really beautiful. I'm sorry, guys, but I really like the bit before with the girlie as well.
Oh, yes. Well, this is another thing I've got to ask you about, because, again, it's a little bit dated, of course, that it starts with this very slow kind of tracking shot up this woman's body as she strips down to just a pair of knickers, and then puts on her kind of scuba gear, and it suddenly turns a bit exploitation-y at that moment, right?
This is the problem, and again, shoot me, I don't care. We've got bodies, guys. Take your clothes off and you've got bodies. And I think, if it wasn't for the fact that, okay, it lingers. It's not like the rest of the film is just, nipples on the camera.
Yes.
It's, human beings like to have sex. If you don't like sex, then guys, you're doing it wrong. And they even play it with a bit of humour. He's, the guy's looking down, the girlfriend looks around and says, seriously? And he's like, sorry enough.
Yeah.
And so it kind of gives it that naturalness that I really like, because then when you go down into the zombie shark bit, there is, obviously she's kind of just looking around at the natural flora and fauna after we've been looking at her flora and fauna, which kind of makes sense. And yet when she actually, literally, it's just the stupidity of it. It's just literally, this thing grabs her by the shoulder. It's like almost like tapping her back saying, excuse me, Mom, do you mind me taking a selfie? It's so
amazing.
Silly.
It is amazing, though. I think you're right. I think the one thing I will say in its defense of that moment is that there is this emphasis on her body, right, when she's down under the water, and just how kind of flimsy she looks in comparison to these other forces around her, I suppose. The shark and then the zombie that are both coming for her at the same time.
Oh, completely. I mean, this is the thing. Let's not forget, when people go on holiday, particularly if they don't, particularly back in the day where you didn't have zoom lenses and all this kind of rubbish. People, for goodness sake, particularly around that time period, people are a lot, freer with their bodies. Yes. And there is a sense of, why shouldn't she? But at the same time, the idea of having your bits out in that kind of stretch of water, not my thing. But as you say, it kind of it makes her look so flimsy in terms of you don't know what's down there. And in fact, she is looking around coral reefs, and you don't know if there's going to be anything nasty in the water. I mean, for goodness sake, what if she caught her doodah on a thistle or something?
Yes.
You know, I mean, an enemy's move. I mean, those things give me the creeps anyway.
I know. I get a bit freaked out being scuba, like under the sea as it is, because of not just sharks, but jellyfish and all sorts of things that can get you right at any moment. Especially if you've got, like you say, if you're a little bit, exposed in the way that she is. There's a lot of danger there potentially, and I guess that all adds to the scene. That's the thing. But it's this weird mix of tension and just sheer beauty of that underwater cinematography as well. I just loved it. And the shark is a real shark, right? I mean, this is a couple of years after Jaws. And this is not a fake Jaws Bruce shark, is it? This is a real shark. Apparently they fed it up to the point where it was full, so it was less likely to want to eat anyone. And I think they sedated it as well, which I'm sure obviously they wouldn't be able to do in this day and age. But again, the way Italians treated animals in these films back then was questionable.
Yes.
But they fed it and sedated it, and then they just threw this actor who played the zombie and this actress in with this live shark swimming around. And it's just... I just find that scene astounding on so many levels, It's just incredible.
It becomes so surreal because it is so beautifully photographed, and yet at the same time it's like this could feasibly happen because her way of acting is so natural. It's just like she doesn't, yes, the camera tracks up over her body before she goes in, but it's like she's just thinking, well, hey, I'm just going to go for a swim. It's not a thing. Yeah, totally. And it's I just love it. I just think it's a wonderful scene and genuinely suspenseful. I think, it really got me, and the music, obviously we've talked about already, that Fabio Frizzi score, yes.
sort of that thumping score coming in at this moment. And there's the initial sort of threat of the shark, and then she kind of swims downwards to get away from it to hide, and then you get that hand grab of the zombie emerging, and it's wonderful. And then that incredible zombie versus shark sort of fight where the shark ends up ripping the zombie's arm off and stuff. I just gobsmacked by the whole thing, to be honest. I thought it was wonderful.
Exactly. I mean, the whole thing about the ripping. I mean, it's like it's almost like you can almost see him saying, "Hey, folks, there's no arm in it." It's so stupid.
Yeah, it's stupid, but it's brilliant. I just loved it. I loved it. Yeah, really big fan.
The funny thing that always kind of gets me about, there's almost like a sense of the natural world kind of reasserting itself, because if within that ecosystem, as it were, they are all living together, and so the zombie isn't phased, and the shark's just thinking, oh, here we go, it's another one.
Yes, totally. It's just become part of the kind of food chain, a part of the way this world works. Like you say, the ecosystem. I think there's definitely a link there between, again, it's going back to the maggots, the soil, the worms, the earthiness, and then also the water, and the way that these zombies just coexist on this island called Matul, which I think is quite funny. With all these other creatures and stuff. It's great, and it just adds to this feeling of these poor, flimsy human beings do not stand a chance, do they? With all of these dangers around them, they're fucked from the start, let's be honest.
Oh, exactly. I mean, the funny thing is about this as well, I mean, when we think about the idea of what we wanted, a horror film or a zombie film to be, so much of it is, okay, who's going to get bit and what's going to happen to them?
Yes.
And it's almost like it becomes this ascension thing. It becomes this, how can they become better? Because yes, you've got the hero, but by you're kind of thinking, okay, what will their love and will their personality survive afterwards? Which when you see, particularly towards the end where they do say, right, kill me now, can I keep going? It actually becomes really sweet because, after all, when we think about one of the interesting things about the way we think of death, it's something talked about a guy called Chris Rojek, who wrote a book on celebrity, and he said that when we think about death, we think, how can we survive? One of the ways is celebrity.
Yeah.
One of the ways is to get religion. One of the ways is genes.
What was the second one? Sorry.
Religion. We get religious, yes, which works with zombie stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the ways is that we pass on our genes via children. Now, of course, if you can't do that, the way that we've kind of cobbled these together into our heads, think of things like the Addams Family, is we like to believe that something of our spirits will survive. And so in this sense, I think that kind of shows up in the idea of the zombie, in the sense of that you kind of hope that the zombie they become will be, will retain something of their personality, and that then becomes, once you're the undead, you're unstoppable. in theory.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's it. It's the because I think that's right. Because when you go to sort of ghost stories, for example, there is something of a hopefulness about them, I think. Because it's giving this impression that you know that you still go on, your loved ones might still go on, you know, and that I think that's why ghost stories tend to have that kind of much more kind of melancholic nature to them. And I guess with vampire movies, that's the kind of thing that's the seductive thing about that too, is that you stay young forever. With zombie films, it's different depending on what zombie movie you're looking at, what the myth is, you know, what the mythology is of that particular one. And I think a lot of them reckon with that, don't they? With kind of what happens if a loved one becomes a zombie. Do you put them out of their misery? Do you try and keep them around? Are they still the person they were? Are they not? You know, that kind of thing. More often than not with zombies, I suppose they are just brain dead. That's the thing. It's like they look like them, but they're no longer them, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that always got me with Mr. Maggots, because he looks as though he's actually enjoying it. And it's, I think the thing is, I always saw kind of vampire films as, okay, so you become a sexier, deader version of you. What people flipping do. Whereas there's this, I always felt there was far more of a potential for zombies. Maybe it's just a very personal thing, I don't know, that there was this thing of that you could become like the badder version of, or you could completely change.
Yes.
Because there wasn't... zombies aren't courteous. Vampires are far more courteous.
Yes.
And it was literally like, you know, this is almost like what you would be like if you were very, very drunk and very, very high.
Yes, it's the kind of your id self almost, isn't it, a zombie?
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. Whereas vampires are more bothered about, you know, how the hair's parted.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, considering they can't look in mirrors, they're very vain, aren't they, vampires? Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. It's true. Let's talk about that brilliant moment then with the conquistador, with Mr. Maggots, because again, that's just a wonderful scene, I think, and takes its time and draws it out. And you've got this couple. What are they doing? Are they about to have sex? I can't remember. They're lying on the ground, aren't they? And they suddenly realise they are lying on this kind of burial site of all of these Spanish conquistadors who are there, who all then begin sort of emerging from the soil. And it's again beautifully done, isn't it?
Yes, it's also so strange. It's almost like the weird thing about that is there's been the whole kind of previous dialogue of you know, the reporter and the girl looking for a father kind of thinking, well, you know, they have this joke about, you know, they're on the boat because they're having a little bit of nookie.
Yes.
And it's almost like, okay, I'm not being funny. That guy is not exactly, you know, he's quite long in the tooth comparatively.
Yes.
And yet they're giggly kids. And again, there's this kind of sweetness of that they're completely denying any form of, you know, this is real life. And it's like, okay, let's go and have it, you know, dance in the roses and, you know, jump. And it becomes this very, it actually makes it quite romantic. And then you see all the tombstones, you're thinking, guys, open your blooming eyes.
I know. You get, first of all, you get that brilliant, like almost like a hero shot of the maggot one, right? Yeah, it's the way that they stand compared to Romero zombies. These zombies sort of stand with their head held high almost as well, don't they?
Exactly. These guys are proud, and yeah, it's funny. It really is, and it's funny because when you see these couples, you kind of think, oh, bless them, you crazy kids, and you're kind of almost willing them along because all the lighting's gone quite soft. You know, there's beautiful trees. They lay down and looking up at the sky and all the birds and all the bees, and it's all sweet and lovely. And then it flips that narrative completely because it's almost like literally you're crashing between two different almost story types, and 1 second it could be, well, eventually he turns into, you know, they find out what's happened, he turns into Bond and takes her home to save the day. And then of course instead the idea is all hell breaks loose. And it does get deliciously strange, which is why I think, you know, part of the surprise of that scene is the thinking that actually, death could come at any time, and as a result, you have to run around in the flowers like you are a 16-year-old.
Yes, it's true, because you never know when you might have your throat ripped out 5 minutes later.
Exactly.
A wonderful throat ripping out moment that follows after that. Again, kind of just really gruey. It's the Foley, it's the sound as well of these deaths, isn't it? The sounds that they obviously, you know, as with kind of a lot of Italian filmmaking, everything feels like it was dubbed and everything was done in post, right? But the sound design for this movie, the maggots, the zombies, the crunching, again, it's the squelchiness, isn't it? It works so well.
It does. I mean, part of the funny thing about it is when you look at things like the throat pulling, it's so obviously badly done.
Yes.
In the sense of, it's like, not being funny, guys, but if your skin does that, please go to a doctor very quickly.
I know. It's a little bit dated now, the kind of prosthetics, but it still gets you. It still gets me.
It does. I think the reason why it does is, again, it kind of makes you realise the bits where it does suddenly go very hardcore again. It's again, it kind of, it has that dreamlike quality to it, because you don't start analysing it in terms of, okay, I don't believe that, I do believe that, because it's basically saying it's not what you believe, see it with your inner eye, not your outer eye.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. And by then you're kind of so immersed in the zone anyway that you kind of go with it, I think. What are your thoughts? Does the dubbing bother you in these films?
A little bit.
Yes, I find it quite distracting. Again, it's like adjusting your ears. Eventually, I kind of forget about it, but I always suffer with Giallo and a lot of these movies. It takes me about half an hour to kind of get over how annoying it is that they are so obviously dubbed, you know?
Yes. Oh, I mean, I think it depends on the film. I mean, for me, for this one, in certain places, I don't notice as much.
Yes.
In places like, say, I mean, for God's sake, I think it's The Sweet House of Horrors. You know, I mean, you've got what is evidently an adult woman dubbing the voice of two kids. It just sounds bloody ridiculous.
Yes, yes.
But with this, it because some of it is played straight and some of it is, you genuinely feel for them. Yes. And particularly, as I say, it's when you see Eyeball Lady, you just think, blimey, there is actually a very serious undertone here.
Yeah.
And sometimes the dubbing kind of it takes away from that. But then again, at the same time, I always kind of found it. So when I first watched it, I didn't have any idea what I was watching. I mean, I knew the US kind of films from when I was a kid, but don't forget, this makes me sound terribly old, when I was at uni, the internet was basically pretty much in its infancy.
Yeah.
I mean, we had dial-up for my first year.
Yeah.
And so I hadn't got a clue what I was looking at all.
No, of course, yeah.
And, bear in mind, I was out in the sticks, it wasn't like I could just pop along to local, my dad was the local video guy.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah. And
he had no clue. It was literally the case that, it made it. I just thought, literally, what the hell am I seeing here? Are parts of this real? Because it's obviously they've tampered with this somehow. Mm-hmm. What the hell is actually going on here? And it gave it that sense that eventually went on to part of the thing that made the video nasties so blooming infamous was because it gave it this weird sense of you don't know what is authentic.
Yes, absolutely, that's so true. And I, even more so with some of the more extreme Italian stuff that came out around this era, right? Anything else you want to mention on the film itself? Any other highlights for you, key moments or anything like that, or have we covered the bulk of them?
I think the final bit for me really is, for a start, it's when you build up to that climax. You have obviously the setting on fire of the church, which is absolutely beautiful. It's very, very prettily done.
Yes.
And to me, it had that typical kind of Fulci touch of then when the zombies gradually cross back over the bridge.
Yes.
And
I love that ending, actually, yeah.
It's gorgeous because it is, again, the thing that I always found about it is he has that nihilism. He has that absolute, we're going to die, folks.
Yeah.
And it's such a gut punch, and yet because it is also so stupid, because they are the kind of shambly type, you just think, well, sod it, if we're going to go down, I kind of partly want to see the show.
Yeah, if we're going to go down, let's have Fulci bring us down. Yeah,
yes, exactly.
It's such a trope with zombies, isn't it? It's Romero also, always has this very nihilistic, very kind of the zombies. No matter how stupid and easy to kill they are, they always win. 99% of the time in zombie movies, they win. The world ends and this happens. And it always they always leave you, no matter how satisfying and fun and cathartic they are. They leave you on a bit of a downer most of the time.
Oh, completely. For goodness sake, I grew up watching things like Dungeons and Dragons back in the day, the old cartoons, and I got so sick of the hero wins every blooming time. I just thought, seriously, the world is not like that, stop it. And so literally it was like, okay, so what? Yeah, am I being an edgelord? I don't care. It felt so much more realistic, so I just thought, seriously, we're going to hell in a handcart. And it's like, it made it, I thought this is the equivalent of literally watching Armageddon, sitting on top of a factory, getting off your doodahs on drugs, and just thinking, well, hey, we're going to enjoy it anyway. Yeah. And it always had that. I thought that would be bearable rather than just hiding.
Yes.
There's nothing worse than hiding.
Yes, yeah, fair enough. Overall, by the sounds of it, we're both fans of this movie. I think it's phenomenal. I love it. It would be in my top 5, maybe, zombie movies. I just think it's it's one of those movies I could watch over and over again and always enjoy it. It's just so much fun, right?
Oh, it is. And it's, I mean, also you got the kind of crowd mentality at the end. It's like there's still a weird sense of togetherness for them. You know, they cooperate, bless them.
Yeah, totally. It's great. It's great fun. It's a great kind of bringing together of the old zombie, the voodoo tradition with the kind of the newer Romero stuff and the kind of grewiness of the Cronenbergian body horror. And it's a really beautiful kind of, I feel like this era is when we're in kind of peak zombie movie. I think what we're coming up to, this sort of late 70s, early 80s definitely is when I think it was at its best. So what happened, I want to ask you a little bit, and we won't go too much into this for too long, but just generally kind of, I think this film became famous or infamous maybe, and was very much kind of tied up with the video nasty act of the early 80s and all of that kind of thing. I mean, there are some people maybe listening to this, you know, younger people or people outside of the UK that might not know anything about the video nasties. Tell us a bit about that, just briefly. You know, what do we mean when we call this movie a video nasty?
Well, basically what happened is, right back in the day, you have 1979, you have the birth of home video. And what basically happened with this was, up until that point, all the legislation about things like age ratings and what you could and could not show only applied to cinema.
Yes.
All of a sudden, you have people actually inventing videos, you know, these big clunky things with tapes in them, which have now since become collector's items even amongst some of my students, which is cute.
Yes, I know, they're very hipster now, those like collecting VHS. Yeah,
I know, it's like hipsters, damn hipsters. But what ended up happening was people realised that you could have like a video at home and you could watch it in the comfort of your own home, and they also found that it wasn't necessarily too expensive. As I say, I mean, my dad right back in the day was one of the people who started doing the actual delivery, so you could. People would, for example, with him, they would put in an order for like 15 different titles,
right,
and then they would get what they were given out of a certain number. And what you would often find, particularly back in those days, was they would have, you would order a horror film along with a kids' film.
Yes.
Because it was a way of kind of getting your rocks off without it being too obvious. And what ended up happening was people started swapping these videos between them, and what happens with videos is over time they degrade.
Yeah.
They end up getting kind of kinks on them, that getting kind of grey and blurry, and you can't really see what's what on them. And you ended up in 1981, I believe, having complaints to the Advertising Standards Agency and the British Videogram Association on the basis of the fact that some of these videos, particularly the SS series, which were kind of exploitation films, had images on them, for example, things like SS Experiment Camp, where you would have very kind of crude sexual imagery alongside things like Nazism and stuff like that. And people started complaining, thinking, what the hell are you doing? And there was this massive public outcry. And it was led particularly by a lady called Mary Whitehouse.
Yes.
You know, people who say, but why shouldn't adults be able to see this kind of thing in their own home? I'm half tempted to say that people who make that kind of demand, knowing that children are likely to see it, aren't really themselves very mature and adult.
And she led a rather delightful organisation called CUNT. She was a leader of the CUNTS.
It was not called that.
It genuinely was.
I did not know that. What did that stand for?
It was the Campaign for Cleaning Up National Television.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
Apparently, at one point, her husband actually said, "Love, do you realise what that means?" And then they eventually chopped the end out, but that's literally what it was.
Amazing. That is so good. I never knew about that. That's brilliant. Good old Mary Whitehouse. She's kind of considered like the kind of villain of the horror community almost, isn't she? She's like the ultimate baddie.
Oh, very much so. I mean, she got very in with Thatcher.
Yes.
And they did this whole thing of she would go on to breakfast TV. I mean, Piers Morgan, seriously, compared to her, love, you got nothing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And she would go on, she would say, this is just disgusting, we shouldn't have these in our homes. Not that she'd ever actually seen them, because of course that would involve having a brain and looking for yourself, wouldn't it, love?
Yes. Yes, I mean, she even used to say on record, didn't she? She was like, I haven't seen them, I don't need to see them to know what they consist of or whatever.
Exactly.
I want to know, did you see the film from beginning to end? Because I'm curious about your reaction, because I want to tell you about what Americans
I went to see it. I have to be quite honest with you, that by the time I'd gone so far through it, I thought, my godfathers, what am I wasting my time sitting here for?
So you issued censorship by getting up and going out?
So you left.
And it just turns into this panic, I suppose, didn't it? This moral panic where more and more videos were being pulled and banned, essentially, because of the titles or the cover art. It was a lot to do with that, right?
Yes,
wasn't it? More
very
than
much.
You got the feeling that most of these films hadn't even been seen, right?
Oh God, no! I mean, there's this whole thing about there started out being lots of raids on places. And yet, a lot of the time, the police didn't know what they were looking for either. I mean, I'm pretty sure I remember hearing at one point, the Greatest Little Whorehouse in Texas got impounded. It's a Dolly Parton musical.
Amazing. So it was just whatever sounded in any way offensive was being pulled.
Yes, the idea being, I mean, the whole thing about a moral panic is you literally, if you're going to create a moral panic, it starts off with you have to find something to exemplify the activity that you want banned. Yes. And then you basically generalize it out saying that anything that has this activity will automatically cause harm. So you isolate it, particularly in this case, it became very much isolated into the sense of young guys who are going to go out and create and cause harm, which of course, correlation is not causation for one thing. But the thing that kind of really freaked people out was at that time, there really was nothing to stop. You would go and get your, video, not DVD, I was about to say that, your video from the shop or whatever, and you really could just sit there on the floor in your living room just watching stuff, and it became a massive rite of passage, particularly as the tapes began to degrade and ended up going all the way through Parliament. And you have things like they tried to kind of say, well, okay, we'll not kind of legislate too much if you all sign up to the British Videogram Association. Of course, why bother doing that? Because so much of the cachet of these things was still about having these really ucky-gory kind of, sleeves and titles and all the rest of it, because you're selling to a million young guys who, quite frankly, fancy watching zombies to show they can take it without screaming, and also because they want to get the rocks off.
Yeah, well, that was essentially, and this is it. I mean, I think for a lot of these movies, that was their selling point, right? Was that they had a picture of a naked dead lady on the cover or whatever. Exactly. Yeah, here we go. We've got a picture here in front of us of SS experiment camp, a naked woman hung upside down with a Nazi in the background. Right. So, and essentially, I think that with a lot of these movies, there wasn't much more to recommend them other than that. I mean, I think the irony is of the Video Nasty Act is that people are, even now, we get a lot of people on this podcast Facebook group and stuff being like, when could you cover the Video Nasties? I just think a lot of them aren't that good. I think that they became more celebrated and maybe famous than they would have been had there not been a Video Nasty Act. I think a lot of these movies may have been forgotten forever and buried,
that's one of the fascinating things about all this stuff. I mean, obviously, when you get to 1984, you have the Video Recording Act brought in, and they actually bring in legislation for what you can and cannot show at home. The fact of the matter was they actually did that wrong, and it was eventually repealed and reenacted in 2009. But the interesting thing about all this stuff is that it probably would have died if it hadn't been for the fact that most of the people who went out and got involved in this stuff ended up actually going to the industry themselves. I mean, you've got people like Jake West and Mark Morris, for example, who were very much involved in all this back in the day, now own Nucleus Films.
Right.
And what's happened is over time, it's gone cachet because all these people have gone off and become academics. And believe me, it doesn't matter what you study. If you have a PhD after your name, people think you know what you're talking about. You're respectable. But because of this, it's all of a sudden meant that these things have become cultural artifacts.
Yeah.
And it's become cool.
It's so funny. It's so funny because, of course, there are some gems in there, but there's a list of about 70 odd, and a lot of them are total dreck. Exactly. Let's be honest. Yeah, it's so funny. But now they are the infamous Video Nasties. So yeah, I just think that's really funny how that reputation has slowly changed and flipped. And I suppose the horror community have reclaimed it in a sense, haven't they? Right?
Oh, very much so. I mean, particularly, and also, I mean, I really like the fact that it has been reclaimed because so much of it is showing what absolute shower of rubbish government and legislation is. Because, I mean, the way that they actually decided over things like, bringing in the Video Recordings Act and so forth, they literally got all the MPs who, of course, don't know what the hell to do with horror films. They are not cine literate, to watch a whole lot in one go. I'm not being funny. I love my horror. I wouldn't watch 2 on a trot if you paid me.
Yeah,
not without a breaking, but you'd go insane.
Yeah, totally. No, it's true, especially some of those ones as well. Yeah, because obviously as well, that's what, as a result of the emergence of VHS, was that I suppose more movies were just being made and churned out, right? Because you could make them so much cheaper and distribute them so much cheaper because of video. So I suppose that's the other reason why at the same time there was this glut of cheap, scuzzy movies, right?
Oh, exactly, completely. I mean, I was asking my dad why, direct video closed down, he was saying that they ran out of enough stuff to sell on. I mean, it started off, they had some dude down in London that was doing it. They had some guy, eventually got some guy up in Glasgow. They couldn't keep people supplied, so they stopped. Even though there was this market of just stuff randomly coming in, because the thing was, of course, as well, my dad would actually watch everything through.
Yes.
To make sure, supposedly, that there wasn't anything seriously nasty on there.
Oh, good Lord. It's unbelievable. It's horrible. I can't understand the reason for such cruelty.
And how much was any of this censorship justified? Because we touched on this briefly. Some of these Italian movies did have genuine harm against animals and stuff like that.
Yes, I mean, things like Cannibal Holocaust, for example, has the infamous and, quite frankly, horrible scene with the turtle. Yeah. I mean, I saw that, on a big screen at Cynics a couple of years ago, which is an academic conference. Yeah. And the guys that I were with insisted we went right in the middle at the front. It's like, seriously, I'm going to vom.
Yeah, it's really horrible. It's really horrible. Yeah.
I mean, to me personally, Personally, I don't believe in censorship at all. I think age ratings are a big difference.
Yeah.
But I mean, the way that, say, the BBFC does censorship regulation now in terms of doing public polls, the public are not stupid. The public are treated stupidly, and as a result of that, you look at anybody who's seen the Daily Mail, for goodness sake. It's very hard to know there is different out there if the media that you've been brought up with and you know that you can easily access is giving you a certain perspective on life. And my feeling on a lot of censorship is that, for one thing, correlation is not causation. Just because you see something does not mean you're going to come out and become a serial killer. It depends on a whole load of environmental and biological factors as well. And I suppose the thing that really annoys me about this is there is this presumption of classism. There is this presumption that if you have grown up listening to Bach rather than, I don't know, Backstreet Boys, that
you're less likely to be...
That you're not possible to be corrupted, which is absolute horse dung.
Yeah. Absolutely ridiculous. Yeah.
And the fact is that it stokes this idea that there are certain people who could be corrupted. And I also think that's socially very inherently dangerous to think that it cannot happen to people if you just have better education, because that then impacts on things like the criminal justice system, and it then impacts on this idea that certain people have to be protected from themselves. In which case, okay, how far are you going to go with this? At the end of the day, if you are of a certain age, and it's our responsibility to actually educate the community as to what the effects of these kind of representations are. I mean, for goodness sake, if we lived in a world where you couldn't turn on the news and see dead bodies or hear about murders, I mean, my other kind of specialism is in reporting serial killers. I'm a crime reporter. Then I would maybe think, well, maybe not, but it isn't. It's just because a certain type of film has been judged as less. I mean, for goodness sake, I'm just talking about Bach versus Backstreet Boys. Ever heard of Shakespeare? Has murders in Romeo and Juliet?
Yeah, no, it's fascinating that's so true, and there is always an element of elitism and classism that comes into it, definitely. And obviously, this is a nice place to finish on, because what I usually do is ask, my new guests what your favourite horror movie is. And I think this is interesting because I've got a feeling I know what your favourite horror movie is, and I think it weaves in nicely with the conversation we've just been having about the more extreme end of cinema. So, Charlie, what is your favourite horror movie?
I'm torn. I think it's probably, sorry guys, a Serbian film.
A Serbian film. I think you're the first person I've ever met whose favourite horror movie is a Serbian film. Why is a Serbian film your favourite horror movie?
Because it has that utterly grim yet beautiful idea of abuse as transformative. Yes, I know that's not in any way, shape or form politically correct rather. And there's something, it's the way the lighting is shot and the fact it is so artistically done, yet such a horrendous thing to watch.
Yeah.
And yet the fact is, it's the way it actually works on your brain, because a lot of the controversy, I mean, I wrote about this way back in the day for Scream magazine. So much of the controversy was not about what's actually there, but what you don't see. And it's that trickery that I love. And it's also, I mean, there's also a sequence where the death of Jekka's mother. Jekka was a little girl who's dressed up as Alice. And it's the sheer terror in that sequence, because you see the guy kind of leaning up and he's got this machete and he chops her head off, and you get a zoom down this woman's back and neck, and you just see the head rolling off, and it's horrible. It's horrendous. but it's so beautifully shot. I mean, Peter Bradshaw at the time said it was badly made. You can disagree with what it's showing. You can say that the content is horrible. It is not badly made.
Yes.
That again is part of the classism that annoys me.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a guy who said that American Mary had two conjoined twins in it, and it's like, dude, did you even bother watching this?
Yeah.
And it makes me cross, because it's like, by all means, if you want to criticise the content of a film, do so, but don't, give it a proper hearing. Let it hang itself by itself. But I think the thing that I love about it is it is so unapologetic, and the imagery is so strong, and yet you have stupid bits in it as well. I mean, for goodness sake, the bad guy looks like General Zod.
Yes, he does. Well, it does have a kind of campy, silly element in it too, right?
Yes.
I mean, in some ways it's so extreme that sometimes your only natural reaction can be to laugh at it as well, right? That's what I found.
Oh, exactly. I mean, for God's sake, at one point, the main guy's, he's tried to get away, and, the General Zod character said, Stars just jumped out of the window, go get him. And it's like, really?
Yeah.
And it is, again, it's that absurdity that, of course, I mean, it's a very hard film to watch. I mean, for God's sake, when I saw it in a press screening, I held my eyes out at the end. I really cried, because it is such a tragedy.
Yeah.
And yet it has this whole thing of it encourages you to pick up on the kind of, it encourages you to pick up on those little bits of light and see those as kind of chinks in the thing. I mean, people talk about Martyrs, the original.
Yeah.
I was so annoyed with that ending, because I just thought, you've wussed out.
Really?
Yeah, I just thought fade to white, whoopie bloody do not. That's not been done before, has it, guys?
What? But did you not find the ending I found it quite traumatizing in a way. No, just emotionally in terms of what she's been through, maybe more rather than what they show. But
yeah, I mean, I got that bit, but I just thought the final thing, I thought that I didn't get the sense of this has blown your mind. It's just like, all right, whoops.
Oh, I see what you mean. Right.
It was just this as though it was just this cut and dry decision, and it's that lack of nuance that annoyed me.
Yeah, there you go. So you're it's safe to say you prefer the more hard hitting end of horror then, by the sounds of it.
Very much so. I like extremes, because I like something that will take me out of my own head, that will show me something worse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the few films I actually had to stop was Last House on the Left, the first one. I got halfway through and it flipped something in my brain, and my other half actually came into the room. I'd been watching it, I was doing the ironing, and I was literally just standing there completely.
Yes.
And he literally had to turn it off and sit me down, because it had done something weird to my brain.
Yes. In a good way or bad way? I mean, was that more of a negative effect than when you saw a Serbian film then, for example? Was Last House on the Left more traumatic for you?
It was, because I felt that as though, for the fact that, for one thing, it was far more realistic.
Yes.
And that's what got me about it, because I just thought, people really are like that, do that.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah,
and the way it's shot, it kind of looks more kind of almost snuffy, doesn't
exactly.
it? Yeah.
That I have more of a problem with. But then again, to be honest with you, I mean, that's one thing I would never show to students, because I think it's too much.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, because it doesn't have the absurdity to it, it becomes too traumatizing for people.
Yes, I agree. Another Video Nasty, wasn't it? That was a Video Nasty.
Exactly.
As well.
Exactly. And I think the thing is about those ones, that but then again, I think it's like with any damn Shakespeare play.
Yes.
It becomes about its art, and it's our responsibility, if we choose to learn to accommodate that, because you cannot just wish human experience out of existence.
No.
It doesn't work. And, you could take away all the media, you could censor media. People will still do stuff.
Yes, very true.
And it helps us to actually understand those impulses.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think Last House is brilliant.
Yes, it does what it sets out to do, right?
Exactly. You can't complain because something does something, what it says on the tin, just because it's not the particular author that you personally have been taught to approve. I'm sorry, but that's your thing you've got to get around. I mean, for me, I don't, certain things I don't watch, but that's purely my own subjectivity. I'm enough of an adult to realise that, quite frankly, different strokes for different folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think absolutely legit. And any horror movie, no matter how extreme, I think is my only rule for myself is that, I think as long as there is no actual harm of people or animals, I don't think there should be anything that's too taboo or too shocking or too,
Well, this is the problem, because I must admit, I mean, this is where I genuinely am still trying to make up my mind on this. The whole idea of harming people or animals. Animals, for one thing, well, if you kill an animal, if you're a meat eater, then that's slightly
that's very true. That's
difficult.
very true. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very aware of it, because I mean, my kind of hobby is I train squirrels, so I'm very, which a lot of people eat, and yet to me that's absolutely clear, because it's the reason why they're killing them. Whereas to me, I think the difference with the idea of harming adults is that, well, what are you going to call harm? Are we going to go down the route of things like Last Tango in Paris, or are we going to say,
absolutely,
you can't tell what kind of harm you may necessarily come to emotionally. You don't know what the repercussions are going to be. And there's also the thing of, if you're an adult who's consented, as long as you're consenting to the behaviour you're going to get and you know what you're going to get, it becomes a bit difficult to revoke that. I mean, for goodness sake, Bill Skarsgård, who is playing playing Pennywise, in it, there were rumours that he was not going to return for the second film because it messed him up.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because look at some of the directors that we laud over all others, like Kubrick and Hitchcock, and the way that they famously treated a lot of their...
Bingo.
Let's be honest, actresses more than actors as well,
Yes.
Well, on that note, Charlie, we shall call it a day there, but thank you so much for joining me. It's been absolutely brilliant. Charlie, if people want to find you on social media, come and chat to you, say hello or anything like that, are you on Twitter or anywhere else where they can find you?
I most certainly am. I'm on Twitter as, I believe it's Dr. C. Oughton. I'm also on Instagram, same thing. Facebook. I'm easily grabbable, and often, yes. Basically, I'll be either talking about serial killers or squirrels. It's one or the other.
That's true. Or It.
Or It, indeed, yes.
And any news on when we might be able to get your It book off the shelves in our local bookstore?
My hope is that it should be out shortly after the film itself. It's very nearly done.
Great.
It includes the world's first ever experiment to see just how effective Stephen King's It is for the reader.
Oh, which I was actually a part of that experiment.
I'm so chuffed you came.
No, I loved it. It was great. I was really excited to be a part of it. And I'm excited because obviously I don't know at all what that experiment was. So I'm really excited to read the book and find out what it was I was actually doing there, what I was taking part in.
Oh, exactly. This is the thing. That particular experiment... basically seeing about how our eyes react to horror. I shall leave it at that for now, but it's literally, as far as we can tell, it's the first time in the world it's been done.
Amazing.
And the early indications are we've proved our hypothesis that Stephen King is an absolute goddamn genius.
Amazing. Oh, well, it's great. I can't wait to read it. Charlie, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Been dying to come.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a big thank you to my guest, Charlie Oughton. Such a pleasure to have him on the podcast at last. So, what do you think of Zombie Flesh Eaters? I know it's quite an infamous movie. I know it's got some problematic areas. I know that it's quite divisive. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Get in touch. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. And if you want to keep up with what other movies we're going to be covering over the next few weeks on the Zombie series, then please follow us on Letterboxd. That's @EvolutionPod on Letterboxd. You can find all the other episodes of our Zombie series that have aired so far, as well as 3 other whole seasons of the podcast, all available on our website. That's evolutionofhorror.com. And don't forget, you can find this podcast on all major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Stitcher, Libsyn, Podbean, and various others. And if you get a chance, please do drop us a little rating or review. It helps us get discovered by new listeners. Ideally, a lovely 5-star one telling us how great we are. That would be brilliant. So, where do we go from here? Well, we are going to continue with more Lucio Fulci because I love him so damn much. So after Zombie Flesh Eaters, he carried on doing some really nasty, schlocky movies about the undead. He actually did 3 movies, which in some ways are kind of linked thematically, although I wouldn't really say that you couldn't watch one of them without having seen the others. I am talking about Lucio Fulci's Gates of Hell trilogy. That's City of the Living Dead from 1980, The Beyond from 1981, and The House by the Cemetery from 1982. We are going to be smashing our way through all 3 of those movies next week. I am going to be joined by the BFI's Michael Blythe to discuss all of these movies in spoilerific detail. Cannot wait. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.